Morning, everybody. Happy the sun has got his hat on still day, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's online political editor, Mr. Dan Bloom. Morning, Dan.
Morning.
Now, we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day. We want you to ask us your questions because this is the People's Paper Review. So dig into the comments and we will answer as many of them as we can. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a footballer's hairdo, not for the first time, above the fold, but also bride and doom. The fact that 50,000 weddings and therefore many millions of pounds could be at risk if COVID restrictions against gatherings of more than 30 people are held up past June the 21st. Now, the inside pages 4 and 5, it reports that the wedding industry is losing £325 million a week every time that the restrictions bite through this pandemic, especially because summer is the main wedding season. Now, according to the maths, Dan, that I've just done in a massive hurry here, at 12,500 weddings and £325 million a week, a fortnight's delay means 25,000 weddings could be cancelled, perhaps 250,000 people affected, and £2/3 of £1 billion are at stake. So where are we, and what is the government going to do about this?
Well, the problem is we're at the point where we still don't know if there's going to be a delay to the roadmap. So we find out on Monday whether we can go ahead on June the 21st with lifting that cap on weddings from 30 people to unlimited people. The sort of mood music at the moment is there could well be a delay. It's understood that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who's always opposed lockdowns in the past, pretty much, is kind of in favour of a delay if that's what the evidence says about the Delta variant, the Indian variant. So the problem is not just that there might be a delay. The problem is that we're 11 days out now, and we still don't know if there will be one. And that's what all the uncertainty is about, isn't it?
Yeah, and the wedding industry says it takes a lot longer than 7 days to get everything sort of ramped up and going. They have to have lots of staff. We've got a huge problem with hospitality staff at the moment as well, getting those recruited. So things are going to be sticky if you're trying having a wedding sort of 3 days after June 21st. Now, Danielle says, I'm getting married on the 17th of July. Congratulations, Danielle. Do you think they'll change by July, Dan? Middle of July, inside a month? What do we reckon?
By mid-July, I think we'd probably look a bit safer, but I wouldn't take out an insurance policy based on what I'm saying, Danielle, because the government's top of the hat. And Emma's on 14th of August. Well, I'm going to a wedding on the 11th of August. So let's, well, I hope I am anyway. So let's pray that things are working by then. But it's amazing. So many people affected. These messages are all just flashing up to us. Everyone's got something in the pipeline.
Because a lot of people as well who've had weddings organised in the past year or so, 18 months, have had to push it back and push it back and push it back. And they've tried to find the first available date, which means after June the 21st, wedding venues are trying to pack them in. And that's when you can find the florist. That's when you can find all the other stuff that you need, the suit hire, anything else, the bands. Not that you can dance at the moment at weddings. Mike says, morning, Mike. I wonder if the good news Prime Minister will wait until the last possible second before delivering the bad news like he has at all other times. When are we going to hear about June the 21st? Is that next Monday? Am I right?
Next Monday. It's on Monday the 14th. So Mike is right that he will wait until the last possible second. But in his defence, which is not something I say that often, that's the only way you can really do it because the data is still emerging. And all these promises we had about data that we would know about by last week or 2 weeks ago still hasn't materialised. So we're just hanging on and waiting.
And it does seem, doesn't it, that the data is starting to look a bit iffy. The Delta variant, the Indian variant, although the cases are quite low, I understand. I saw some graphs yesterday. The rise in cases is exponential. It's sort of straight up when it's rising.
As you say, it's not about whether cases are low or not necessarily, because an exponential curve is an exponential curve. And if it's rising exponentially, it doesn't matter that it's low now because it will be high in 3 weeks' time. The real question is not just the rise in cases, which is, up 50% in a week. It's whether there's a rise in hospitalizations, and that changes. There is a rise. It seems like it's not necessarily pegged to the rise in infections, but it's too early to say how much that might be linked, especially because when you go to hospital, it happens a little while after you get infected. So that's the thing. The key question is the vaccine, even with the Indian variant, still allowing some people to get sick, but stopping them from having to go to hospital? Means they only get the sniffles. And if that's true, then they will push ahead with being able to open up weddings and stuff. But if it's not clear, they might delay for a couple of weeks so that all vulnerable groups have had their second dose at least 3 weeks ago when things reopen, so that it has time to have effect.
Kate says her wedding there has been cancelled 3 times. Lisa says, my brother's supposed to be getting married on the 26th of June. Ooh, bit close. Planned for 85 guests. We won't know until the last minute. I wish Boris would give us some idea. The problem as well, I've noticed from all these people who are putting messages up here, we're talking about younger people getting married. This isn't 50-year-olds getting married. Carol there, her daughter's having a wedding in September. And it's in younger people that the Delta variant is spreading a lot at the moment, isn't it, Dan? It's younger adults. People are more likely to be going to some of these weddings, frankly. I should be getting married 26th of June, says Chloe. I'm glad I moved my date to next year. It's the 3rd time now. If you're going to, it was one of the messages there said that taking the excitement away and not having much fun with all this. But if the people who come to your wedding are more likely to be spreading the disease and more likely to be catching the disease, and even though they might not die, more likely to be off work, more likely to be in hospital perhaps because of the disease, because they're too young to have been vaccinated yet, you wouldn't really want that to go ahead anyway, would you? I'd have thought.
Well, it depends. I mean, no one wants something to go ahead where they have a risk of getting very sick or their loved ones getting very sick. But on the other hand, people have had a year and a bit of pain, haven't they? Just look at Leanne's comment. You know, her sister had to change her date, and this time she's had to sign something which says that if the government cancels, she won't get a refund. Personally, I think it's pretty outrageous. But the wedding venues are also struggling, so you can see why they've done it. And you know, you can argue that, well, people shouldn't have arranged their weddings within the 1 week after the earliest date for the end of the roadmap. On the other hand, people are stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? Because wedding venues are crammed for bookings. They've all got a year of pent-up demand. Prices, I expect, are pretty grim, and trying to just get a slot. So people might have taken what they can get in the hope that they can actually have their special day at last after a year and a bit.
Exactly. And if your venue is sort of started saying you can't have your money back if this doesn't happen this time, you know, if you can still have a wedding with 30 people, which you can at the moment, which is what Boris Johnson had, then they'll say, well, you can have a wedding. It's not being cancelled like it was in the middle of the pandemic. There's no reason to refund you. You can have your wedding. You just, you know, you only have 30 people. I mean, that's not the end of the world. Good enough for the Prime Minister, etc. Good enough for Princess Beatrice, etc., etc. Good enough for the rest of you, they would say.
It's a good time for the introverts of the world who didn't want 100 guests at their wedding anyway and now have the perfect excuse not to invite that bloke from work and that sort of thing. Exactly. But I'm not sure that works for everyone. I think a lot of people are going to want their 100 guests and all their loved ones to see them, time or not.
Yes. And Tracy says, I'm supposed to be going to my friend's wedding in Cardiff on July the 9th. What have I missed, please? Well, Tracy, basically, it's a suck it and see situation. We think July the 9th will probably be okay, but who knows?
Well, of course, Wales has its own restrictions, so it's not affected by the June the 21st lockdown conversation, because that's an English thing. But I can't, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, Wales has vaccinated almost everyone, isn't it? Every adult. So because they're done so well in Wales. So I'd imagine that if you are of Wales and in Wales, you're absolutely fine. If you're travelling from England, there may be some issues later on. I should check that. Keep asking us your questions. Are you getting married? Have you delayed your marriage? Do you not want to get married? Are you happy having a smaller wedding? Do you think this is all a fuss about nothing? Let us know. Donna says, I don't understand how thousands go to football matches, but weddings could be on hold. They've got a point there, haven't they, Dan?
Yes.
If you go to Wembley, then...
Yeah, I think it's you can see the logic behind it. You just might not agree with it or think that it is logical. The logic being that when you go to a football match, you're not kind of, well, some people might be, but it's quite organised. It's still half capacity in the stadium, so you're sat spread out. You take a lateral flow test before you go. At a wedding, you're sitting next to people at the table for a few hours. You're dancing with them, although that's not, I think,
you're indoors.
All that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're indoors as well at a wedding, generally speaking, aren't you? Some people might be outside for a bit of it, but, football stadium, of course, you are outside. Now, Sharon says, my daughter's wedding is the 1st July, and I'll be happy with 30 people. A lot of people be happy with 30 people, and others have got bigger families and they want everybody there. But, there are, at the moment, we've got COVID laws in places like the Northwest getting replaced by guidance, haven't we, Dan? They're giving extra restrictions, but it's only advice. They're just putting pressure on you, social pressure to obey stricter rules, even when the lockdown is happening. So and there's 5.7 million living under extra guidance. So I'm going to give you a little bit in a minute. Now, Shelley says, yes, it matters. The 3rd time lucky, I got married November the 4th, 2020. In a socially distanced wedding for 15 people. It was a beautiful day. I'm happily married. But you have no idea how much stress I was under. The wedding insurance expired, couldn't get a new policy, couldn't get an extension. At the mercy of the goodwill of wedding suppliers to be compliant, who had suffered so much already and struggled too.
Oh, that's really hard. And November the 4th was, if I remember correctly, a couple of hours before the second lockdown. So the second lockdown had already been announced, but hadn't come into force yet. So that would have been a very difficult time. I can only imagine. In
under the wire, I think, Shelley. And the important thing is what she's just said there as well, which I'm a divorcee, so I have a different attitude to weddings to some people, right? I had a lovely wedding day. It was lovely. It only cost $5,000 as well, so everything was pucker. But that doesn't indicate whether or not you're going to have a good marriage. Right? I had a bad marriage and I had a divorce that cost 3 times as much as the wedding. So if you have a wedding day that you weren't expecting and there's fewer people, or you can't do all the things you want to do, it doesn't mean your marriage isn't going to be a success. All right? It's one day. It is the least important day in your entire marriage. Trust me on that. It doesn't matter nearly as much as the day when you're not looking your best and you're having a big row and you decide that you can fix it, right? That matters more than the wedding day. Trust me. Although this matters a lot at the time, a marriage is a 40-year project. It is not the 40 minutes you spend in a church. Trust me on that.
My parents got married, I think, nearly 40 years ago in a completely unwhite wedding ceremony. They just went down the register office. I think they had their 2 witnesses, etc., a couple of friends, and that's it. And I have friends who've done that too. That's special to some people, but it's also, what's special to people is what's special to people. You have to make quite a good argument for denying people who want the big wedding with all the guests their chance to have that. So now with lots of people vaccinated, it's a very difficult discussion to have, especially when people committed thousands of pounds to these venues.
Exactly. Now Delia says there, my niece needs 50. That is the size of our family. How do you say no to some of them? How do you get an aunt and uncle in, but not the nieces and nephews? It's pretty sticky. And it's also worth pointing out that even if you do go ahead for a wedding, I think at the moment, maybe it changes after June the 21st, you can't dance. And
not at the moment, I believe, but I think that's one of the things they're talking about for after June the 21st.
Hopefully you'd be able to dance and all the rest of us. But try and look at the bright side. 7 in 8 of us are counting the pennies. In the pandemic, people don't always want to go to weddings, don't want to go away if they're feeling that there's any kind of infection rise or something else. So you might be giving people a bit of relief if they can't come to the wedding. And it's an extortionate expense, and the honeymoon's off anyway. Let's face it, you ain't going anywhere unless it's skeggy. So, perhaps try to find the upside, or try to find something good in skeggy to do. If it's so important,
you could go to Cornwall. I think there's like 1 spot left in the entire country. After ministers yesterday, George Eustice said, "Don't go abroad this summer. How about Cornwall? Try Cornwall. It's going to be very, very busy."
It's always very busy. But George Eustice, of course, runs a family farm in Cornwall, so perhaps he's going to rent out some space for tents or something. That's probably the last place you could have your honeymoon, I'd have thought, at the moment. So we shall see. But let's move on to something else, because we've had an awful lot of weddings. Now we want to talk about schools, because now Boris Johnson might be a bit of a clown. and everyone likes a bit of a clown, but he's one who's starting to look like he's actually picking on the school children in the front row of the circus. First, he wouldn't feed them. Then he didn't give them enough help to work from home. And then he kicked them out of school in the new year with about 5 seconds notice. Most recently, he took a £15 billion schools catch-up plan and put it through the mincer, causing his school czar to quit and gave the pupils the equivalent of 99p a day to catch up on their extra learning. Now, Labour are going to force a vote on the schools debacle today. But what are they actually going to achieve with this, Dan? What's it going to do, just Labour having a vote on it?
Well, the vote itself doesn't achieve anything, particularly. It's all about public pressure. But what the motion is trying to do is something very specific. It's persuading the government to put out a new plan for catch-up that isn't just about this tuition programme before the summer holidays. Because what the government have done is the Gavin Williamson, Education Secretary, pushed for money, more money than he's got, to do something a bit more ambitious, and was knocked back, and so was forced to sort of defend that publicly. And he has said that he's looking at more ambitious things, like the way the time is arranged in the school day. So that means potentially kind of extending things like after school clubs and sports and things to give a more rounded experience and give kids more like time in school. But that costs a lot of money because you have to pay teachers. You either have to give teachers a pay rise and change the contract, or you pay them hourly. You know, you give them an hourly rate for doing optional work outside of the school day. Now, what Gavin Williamson has said is that he's looking back ahead of the spending review. But the spending review is only potentially in the autumn this year. And that's, you know, the time is ticking for these kids. A year and a half is a very, very long time when you're a teenager, as I'm sure we all remember with a shudder. But what Labour want to do is put out the plan in the next 6 or so weeks before the summer holidays and have something in place before then. Now, the chances of them succeeding might be a little bit slim, because even if Gavin Williamson wants to do it, if it involves any money, he has to battle with it for Treasury. And my understanding is, you know, there's a bit of a battle over in the department at the moment over trying to work out what they can do for free, essentially, what they can do with the money they've already got before they're able to justify more money in the autumn.
That's it. And I think I'm right in saying Rishi Sunak has said, well, if you want to have an extra half hour on the school day, or you want to go into this August holidays, show me the evidence that that would fix the problem. And of course, you can't have the evidence if you haven't done it yet. So, you know, that was the problem, I think, with the £15 billion plan, was Rishi was saying there's no proof this is going to fix the problem. And, you know, not even trying to fix the problem as a result, because well, that might not work, you know. But anyway, what do you think about schools reopening and the catch-up plan? Do you want kids to have an extra half hour in the day? Do you want them, teachers, to have a bit more pay to do a bit more work? Are you happy with the long school holiday, which I think was introduced because children needed to help bring in the harvest or something 1,000 years ago, and strictly isn't necessary now, she said, as a mother. So let us know what you think. Now, there's one good thing in there, actually, I want to just quickly mention, because Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, says in that piece that actually not doing this risks costing us £420 billion in the long run, £500 billion in the long run from our economy if we don't spend a couple of billion now. But of course, this is the problem with politics, isn't it, Dan, and the current government as well. If they spend a few billion now, are they going to be around to take the credit for the 420 billion we make at the end of it in 20 years' time? I think possibly not. And it certainly won't be the same politicians, even if the Tories are still in power.
Well, that's just it. And handily for Rachel Reeves, she is taking pretty much the same line as Kevin Collins, the education catch-up czar, the person who quit over this sort of inadequate funding. He was making the argument that it doesn't matter that it would cost a fortune now. You save money in the long run, because these kids, you know, are going to be have problems sort of magnifying and duplicating for their whole lives if they don't catch up on education. And you've nailed the point, really, Susie. It's that problem of, are you around to take credit in 20 years' time? But it is also that you have a government that feels boxed, and Treasury that feels it's boxed itself into a corner with all these COVID schemes, some of which were rattled off at speed and not perhaps that wise. So one of the claims out today is that you can roughly compare the spending in a year on catch-up to the Eat Out to Help Out scheme last summer, where we all got, Nando's at half price.
That lasted
Rishi Sunak.
8 weeks. That was nothing.
Quite. So, that adds to the problems, because the more schemes like that they've done, the more difficult it is to then find money to borrow more to spend. But then on the other hand, you say it makes it more difficult, because you say, well, look, you've spent all these money on these, COVID schemes, some of which look a bit frivolous now, and yet you're not committing the money to people's catch-up. It smacks of the wrong priorities. So, hopefully the government will come forward with something a bit more, good though they say that tuition is, in a bit of a quicker timescale than sometime this autumn.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Mike says the Education Secretary seems far more animated about the photographed picture of the Queen inside a common room than the future of our children. If you can't respect the Queen, the children have no future, as Whitney Houston didn't sing, Mike. It's also. I have to
say that even Andy Burnham has come out against the Oxford students removing a picture of the Queen, but maybe not. It's not just Tories jumping on it. I think Andy Burnham has a point where he says, whatever you think of our colonial past, it perhaps doesn't achieve very much to remove the portrait.
No, it doesn't achieve anything.
It doesn't achieve anything other than winding people up and creating division, but I couldn't possibly comment.
Exactly. You want to fix the colonial past, build a time machine, otherwise shut up. Right, we're going to move on, because there is some good news. Although you may not be able to have the wedding you want and have a celebration you want, or the education you want, thanks to a really malicious clown who's running the country, there is someone who is having a better day, and here they are. Ta-da! This is Joshi, a 30-stone lowland gorilla who, believe it or not, was born and raised in the People's Glorious Republic of Kent, like me. Although that's where, and you, they're all the best people. That's where the similarities end, because Joshi's significantly sexier than I am. He is now being flown from Howlett Zoo Park to a reserve in the Congo, where he is going to join efforts to repopulate the area with lowland gorillas, whose numbers are critically low. And as we can see there, he has got plenty of legroom, although I do hope that straw doesn't become a feature of our post-COVID travel, because that will be a bit itchy once we all get back on planes again. But Dan, your dad was a wildlife photographer, did a lot of campaigning about gorillas. Is this a sign that the zoos as we know them are done and dusted and all their horrors are over, do you think?
No, but it's a sign that they can be a force for good, I guess. There's a lot of talk about, are zoos just a place where you cage up animals and kind of have them as entertainment for the public, almost like a circus or what have you. There are some zoos where that is the case, and animals are treated pretty badly. In this case, Howlett prides itself on, and I've been there as a kid and all that sort of thing, on being more on the rescue side, and this real wilding, I think, is something that's really interesting, even though it's a very early step. They're going to be very sort of protected out there. If we can take a step to get animals back out of captivity and into the wild as well, then I think that can only be a good thing. I remember that you said my dad was a wildlife photographer, and he went out to the Congo and he took pictures of apes. I can't remember if it was gorillas or others or both. And it just would come back with these shocking stories of how, he might have gone out a few years before, and when he'd come back, the numbers had dipped by them a couple of hundred. It was literally, some numbers were just in the hundreds of animals left in the wild. And he's, incredibly passionate about it, because he says you essentially you look into the eyes of one of these great animals, and you're sort of changed forever, because you see them in their own habitat, and you see in many ways how similar they are to us, even if they look very different, and they've got a humanity and a personality and the rest of it. So I just think it's a really uplifting story, even if I should say there is still a link to politics in this one, because the Aspinall Foundation, which runs Howlett's, is the head of comms, I think, is Carrie Simmons, or Carrie Johnson, I should say. She's now taken Carrie Johnson's name.
Perhaps helping them in stories. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah.
And a nice punning headline there, Gorilla Air Miles. But at least Josh has not got any more restrictions to deal with anyway. Elaine says, I'm due to get married. I'm an older bride. It's my first wedding, and my immediate family are over 30 deep, not including husband-to-be's side. Tell me all of my 7 siblings. Ooh, who do I not invite? Weddings of families in each other's bubbles all would have had their injection on, providing masks and 2-meter distancing. There's got to be, if you can let, perhaps, if you can run pilots in theatres like the Sheffield Crucible and stuff, and find that with certain protocols in place you don't spread COVID, why can't you have something similar at wedding venues? It's not, everyone wants to get it working, everyone wants to provide it, everyone knows now with an awful lot about virology. We kind of can't the government just do something to make it a bit easier for people, at least lift it to 40 or 50 people or something, even if you can't have dancing? What do you reckon, Dan? Are they gonna, am I stupid asking if they're gonna err on the side of common sense?
Judging by recent history, I mean, common sense has not always been the watchword. But yeah, as Kelly asks, it's 30 can attend a wedding at the moment, I believe, in England. And the theory is that in a week and a bit's time, they would lift that to an unlimited number, but it's just not promised. And I think the one thing to point out here, and this isn't to cast aspersions on the people who were sort of forced or arm twisted into booking their wedding kind of in late June, they did always say that it was the earliest possible date, that June the 21st was the earliest possible. And in fairness, they did always say that they would only give a week's notice when things were to reopen. So that doesn't take away at all from the sympathy that I have for the families who are, facing some very difficult decisions and all this uncertainty.
Exactly.
But, and it doesn't take away from aspersions on the government and how competent they've been, but also a virus does create uncertainty, and a variant that might have a vaccine less efficient against it creates uncertainty too.
Exactly. And Sophie points out something here. We're talking about schools and education. It's all very well to say, let's extend the school day, or let's do something else. But that does clash with other things that parents and families have already booked or got to do. She's taking their children away for a break. Other kids have got after school clubs that are not linked to school, perhaps that they're desperate to do, like judo and stuff. They can't automatically go. And what happens if, you go to jail if you don't send your children to school? What happens if you don't send your children to school in the middle of August?
Well, they're not. The one thing they're not doing at the moment is extending the school holidays. They've guaranteed that. What they're looking at is extending the school day potentially, but again, this isn't something that's imminent. It's kind of coming down the track. Right.
And John says, morning, John. It's called a government imposing control. This is no democracy. It's pure and unadulterated dictatorship. And what are the so-called opposition doing with Pajama Starmer, the Tory light stooge? Absolutely nothing. Okay, let's take this one bit at a time. A government is supposed to impose control. That's the purpose of governing, right? That's the definition of governing, is a body which can issue instructions and have them followed. So that's one thing. This is no democracy. We voted for it very recently. It's the way we vote is perhaps not thoroughly democratic. We could have proportional representation. We could have regular, phone votes every week and change the government as and when we felt like it. That would be more democratic, but not necessarily very stable.
Very good for my health as a political person.
No, exactly. Have some sympathy for Dan, John. An unadulterated dictatorship, I'm pretty certain, goes around shooting people or locking them up in camps and stuff. And we haven't got to that point yet. The so-called opposition are still called the opposition. Pajama Starmer is a great nickname. I don't know what on earth it might refer to. A man in pajamas? I wear pajamas. There's nothing wrong with pajamas, John. A Tory light stooge. He's doing a very good job then of making it look like he's not a stooge. Absolutely nothing. We've just said they're trying to force a vote on education and schools policy and get the government to do what its own school style wanted. So we're doing quite a lot. John, don't be wiggy.
You can please none of the people, none of the time, or some of the people, almost none of the time.
Almost, exactly. And every political career ends in failure, all being likened to nightwear, it would appear. If you were nightwear, Dan, what would you be? I'd like to be a negligee. What else is this? Pajamas or negligee, that's it. Night shirts.
I know, I've got nothing else. I'd be a
Let's not-
baggy, oversized T-shirt with a 90s slogan on it.
One that you only wear in a breakup. Right, thank you for joining me, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for taking part. Apparently, our techie backdoor says that his backstage says he'd be a dressing gown, which is nice. Touch the Hitchhiker's Guide there. Well done, everybody, for taking part and getting through this. And at least if we don't have going to have our restrictions for a bit longer, at least Joshy is free, or as free as he can be. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next Monday. Bye-bye.